Oh my God, the witches were everything. Hi, I'm Shelby and I love Shakespeare, and today I watched The Tragedy of Macbeth, directed by Joel Coen and starring Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, and I cannot wait to talk to you about it. The first part of this will be spoiler-free in a way, in case you're trying to decide whether or not to watch the film. And in the second part of the video, I'll talk to those who have seen it and we can just kind of gush about what we loved and what we didn't. And you can come back after you've watched it and gush with us. And in another way, none of this is spoiler-free because it's a 400-year-old play, so it's been spoiled. Like, everybody dies. Sorry if that's a surprise. So maybe it's not spoiler-free. So if you're deciding to watch it or not, I absolutely recommend watching this film. I'm a Shakespeare devotee, an actress, an educator, and if you have never seen an adaptation of Macbeth, this one might be a little challenging. For instance, the very, very first scene when the king says, "What's happening on the field?" And then there's a guy who has a long speech about what's happened on the field, which is how Macbeth just killed it. Like, I guess literally too, but really ruled on the field. In film, there's an opportunity to do flashbacks, to have a visual of what maybe someone is saying. And in this film, you don't get any of that. So right away, you know that there's not going to be much visual explanation or help to the audience. So I do think, and I have heard from a couple people that they've tried to watch it and just got too confused. It's such a beautifully done film. Hands down. Artistic, the shots are gorgeous. It is a visual delight to watch. But if you're not very familiar with Macbeth as a story and you're afraid that you might get a little hung up on not quite knowing what's happening, maybe read a summary through beforehand or just let it kind of wash over you. Sometimes with Shakespeare, even for those of us who know it really well, you don't get every single word. Even if you rewatch these plays or these adaptations over and over again, you'll probably get something new just because you're a different person that day. So don't worry about getting each little thing, but it is helpful to know what the plot is if you don't feel like you're getting it from the performances, because you don't want to feel lost as an audience. So this film won't really help you know the play extremely well, but it will, for those of us who know it even slightly, will illuminate some things and for me fix some very problematic scenes or images that other productions have struggled with. So definitely worth your 2 hours of time. Do not feel bad about looking up a summary beforehand. And even if you know Macbeth very well, there's still quite a few surprises in this film. Last thing I'll say to those who haven't seen it, to kind of frame your viewing experience, it's very stark in a beautiful way. It's literally in black and white. And then all of the production design, all of the sets and everything, and the lighting, stunning, is meant to kind of isolate and or highlight the language, I believe. Usually if you see a play in a black box or minimalist kind of a setting, it does allow the language to be the highlight rather than the amazing set piece that comes in. So when watching this film, that's what I would offer you as you're watching. Does the setting allow the language to be the star, or does it detract in some ways by kind of sucking the energy out of the language? I cannot wait to hear what you think. So go watch the movie, then watch the rest of this video afterwards and comment below. Go watch it. Hints! Okay, so for those of us who have seen it, oh my God, it was so fun. Here are my thoughts. To me, it felt very, number one, artsy, right? What does that mean? But also very Twilight Zone. It felt like, because of the tone visually and also just the quietness of how people were speaking, it was setting up an environment, almost a space, in which to see Macbeth, this play, as a social experiment. Do you agree? Let me know below. It seemed intentionally unrealistic, so almost in a Brechtian way, for those who know what Bertolt Brecht theater aesthetic was, right? To kind of increase separation from the audience. He didn't want people to lose themselves in it. He wanted people to have some distance in order to think very critically about what was being presented. And so that's kind of how I watched it. It didn't suck me in, but I don't know if it was meant to. So for some people that might be a turnoff, and for some people that might be even more of a reason to watch. First, let's talk about the images. So the first image that really struck me was when Lady Macbeth was walking down the hallway with the letter from Macbeth, talking about the three witches' predictions, and the light behind made the hallway, it was this angle, and it made it look like a guillotine. And I just thought that was genius visual foreshadowing. It immediately put me into this place of, yeah, they're gone. And like I said, there's nothing to spoil. Everybody knows that it's a tragedy of Shakespeare and people are gonna die. And probably the title characters, because that's usually what happens. I love that Lady Macbeth burned the letter afterwards. Lay it to thy heart and farewell, and then it was gone. Shows her political mind of not wanting to leave any traces, and also gave me a hint of how intimate their relationship is. That it wouldn't be something that she would hold on to forever. She knew it had to be destroyed, and she did it in an organic but feisty way, obviously with fire. And she didn't need to pour over these words again. They were already inside her and she knew exactly what to do. So it was a very bold visual statement. I loved how they portrayed Banquo's soliloquy of just this tiny, tiny little hole with it coming down to highlight how insular those kinds of speeches are, right? It is you talking to yourself, i.e. the audience. And a couple times the film broke the fourth wall, which I loved. And also Banquo started with Macbeth. That's the first time we see them as a pair, as a team, as brothers in arms. And then suddenly the next time we see him outside of Macbeth, he's not only alone, but he's extremely alone. Loved the cauldron. I mean, I'll talk about the witches in a second, but that image of water and all of the ingredients going in and have it just kind of truly bubble around and so wide was just, I love how extreme that was. It's not a little cauldron that we're putting stuff in. It's an entire floor of water. I think it was a very intelligent choice to have Duncan wake up with Macbeth above him right before Macbeth stabs the king to then fulfill the prophecy and become the king. Because it shows how in trust Duncan is with Macbeth. Macbeth says that he is here in double trust, as a friend, as a soldier. And I love that Duncan, being awoken in the middle of the night, sees, if I saw anyone above me, I'd freak out. But Duncan, in his gentle way, looks up and sees Macbeth and is comforted by it almost, and then tries to sit up, is pushed down, and even that, it raises a little bit of, oh, that's weird, but there's no alarm about it. It shows so deeply Macbeth's long, long loyalty until he's disloyal. And then the way he gets Duncan, the way he kills Duncan is meticulous. It is of a soldier. And that is why this film and Denzel Washington as Macbeth is the best soldier I've ever seen. So the big challenge of Macbeth that every production and every actor playing Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have to decide on is, why does Macbeth do it, right? Is it Lady Macbeth chirping in his ear? Is it that he's always had this ambition to be king or be more than he is, and this little prophecy from the witches is just what lights the already gathered kindling of this fire of ambition? And why, if Macbeth is this incredible soldier, decorated, celebrated, recently promoted even by the king, why at this one death does he completely come undone? He kills all the time. And so that's why I think it'd be very hard to play the character of Macbeth, and why this film so beautifully highlights this idea of what it is to be a man, which I'll get to in a second. Right now I want to keep talking about Denzel Washington's performance as a soldier. You see him at first very humble and happy to be a servant to Duncan and do his duty, but also very measured. Man of few words. The first time we see any kind of an emotional outburst is when he leaves the king's tent after Malcolm, the king's son, has been kind of dubbed the heir. which makes total sense, but Macbeth's already wrapped up a little bit in that prophecy because one part of it came true. So we see the measured discipline of a soldier at first, and then we see the burst of violence that can happen within someone who's seen and administered that much violence. I really appreciated all of his nuance and subtlety that he, as a brilliant film actor, knows how to manipulate this medium so perfectly. But my favorite, and I think the best dagger speech I've ever seen, was in this film. And I love how they did the dagger, because the dagger is this odd, is this a dagger that I see before me? How do you do it, right? Do you do it in a way that there's actually a dagger in front of someone? And so then that actor has to reconcile, am I seeing things? So hard to do on stage where it's believable, all of that. In this film, when they have the dagger way in the distance, it makes sense that he's seeing a dagger in whatever that flicker is. We get closer and closer, and we see with each step that he's becoming more resolved in doing this. It's almost like he clicks into soldier now that he's marching again. And then of course it becomes the door handle. And so it makes sense, and it does look like a dagger, but it makes sense that he would see it as a dagger, because even in a metaphorical way, he had this twinkle about him of, oh, is that a dagger? Interesting. He almost knew that he was seeing what he had to do, or what he had committed to do with his wife, everywhere. When something kind of gets in our head, we see it everywhere. And so he saw it far away. It glimmered like a dagger just enough. And then we had a soldier moment of the dagger coming from himself. And that's when I think the soldier was activated. And the other side of it, we saw a bit of him on the ground, right? Of what he's like in battle. And that also shatters any idea that he is being manipulated by a woman or any other person and going like, oh, I just don't really want to do this. He clicks into it. He has his own ambitions, and he has a capacity for violence as a soldier. And I think he even smiles at the end of it right before he goes into the door. And there is something that he gets to do on the battlefield, and then in this moment in his own home, that he doesn't get to do normally when he's at home. And that just seems so clear and organic to him, and really scary in an exciting way. So, well done, Denzel. Love your dagger speech. So what did seem to kind of unlock him and finally push him towards, okay, let's do it, because he thought about it, he wrote about it. You know, why did you break this enterprise to me? A fair question. You know, if you weren't going to follow through on this, why did you let me know and get me all excited about it, says Lady Macbeth. What really gets him back into that zone is this idea of, are you a man? And so I think what actually unlocked in him in this version was a bit of kind of toxic masculinity, right? She really drives home this idea of, you know, when thou dost do it, then you were a man. And that a few times in the film, and of course in the play, that idea of man, right? Right after he kills Duncan and says, he almost does like a check to Lady M of, well, I did it because I was a man, like you said I should be. And so I think Lady M pushes this button and brings the soldier Macbeth home and doesn't realize quite what that means. She's probably never seen him on the battlefield, and she admires him for the soldier that he is. She invites it in under her own roof, and then it becomes something that spirals out of control and she has no control of. And in essence, she loses her husband, which is beautifully contrasted when Macduff hears about his wife and all of his children being slaughtered on Macbeth's orders. And Malcolm's trying to say, please, you know, turn that sadness to anger so that we can do something about this and have revenge. And then Macduff says, no, I have to feel it as a man, right? And so it brings up this gorgeous question of, what is it to be a man? Is being a man having all of your emotions or having none of them? Interesting. Love that question being brought up through this adaptation, and it's very true to the play. So love the images, love Macbeth. Lady Macbeth, ooh, don't kill me. I was so disappointed. I was so underwhelmed. I know that she's married to the director. I know that Frances McDormand is a gorgeous actress. And I know, I found out at the end, that she was a producer on it, which makes sense. I mean, who would not be invested in this vision of this stark, like I said, kind of Twilight Zone, intellectual crockpot of thinking about these very big questions. But her Lady M, first of all, there was no love in the marriage. Scholars have said that the Macbeths have the best marriage of the whole Shakespearean canon. Think about that, right? We think about the Macbeths as, oh, just so ambitious, whatever, but they do it together. In the initial letter, he calls her my dearest partner of greatness. They are partners. He wanted her to know the good news before he could tell her in person because he didn't want her to have 1 second of not knowing that she could have this. And then he arrives and she's kind of in automaton mode, and there is not 1 ounce of love, of sex, of adoration, even if it was in a place of respect for him as a soldier. There was no little excitement. There was no anything. And it was so odd. Honestly, the promotional image has more love than anything in the show. And why that's important is that it seemed like Lady M had no reason to have all of this ambition. At one point, she says, I have given suck, right? I have had a baby on my boob, sucking milk, breastfeeding. And so that and a few other references give a lot of people the hint that she has had a child before and the child is no longer there. And then this adaptation too, the words barren and all of that, you could tell it really was kind of Macbeth's thorn, that Banquo has kids and that's part of the prediction, but he doesn't have any. If Lady Macbeth is poking at him of like his manhood, then that's the way he pokes at her womanhood. And there was a production I was a part of that went so far as Lady M being a little bit younger and having just lost her child. And so I, as Lady Macbeth, began the play before the letter scene or anything. I had the very first scene of the show in which I walked out and there was a baby-sized coffin. And that's what I was heaving, crying over. It had just happened that I finally had had a child and then it was lost. And I was fresh grieving, so that when the letter came and there was something to kind of distract her grief, that's why she went so whole hog on it. And then that's what makes it even more desperate and devastating when she says, I have given suck. I know what it means to breastfeed and have a child on me, but I would have dashed his brains out. And that line in particular is what gives Lady Macbeth such a bad rap. So I'm glad that this adaptation leaned into their age being older and that was a true thorn in their marriage. And perhaps that's where the love withered a bit, but there wasn't even a glimmer, a glint of excitement about this ambition. It was just, yes, that's the plan. Let's go. There wasn't a crack. I needed a way in as an audience member, and I just didn't see any bit of her as a woman or a human. So let's talk about this bad rap that Lady Macbeth gets, right? When playing this role, I think a lot of actresses are nervous about falling into the trap of being the villain, right? The ambitious, crazy woman who is just all about pushing her husband into this kind of career move. But when you think about it from the perspective of deep grief, it's that she's so human and so raw, and that's what kind of makes her susceptible to something this extreme. And so I think in this performance, Frances McDormand was so aware of not being the crazy just because someone stamped Lady M as a villain, but again, didn't have any kind of antidote for that. It just kind of seemed to go in the middle and never let us in. And so I never felt for her plight. I didn't care when she was going a little cray. I didn't feel for her except for as someone whose plans went a bit awry, instead of as a woman, as a person. Macbeth, I felt everything for. Again, with a little bit of that intellectual distance. And the biggest missed opportunity is in, I think, her juiciest speech of unsex me here. She's calling the spirits in to say unsex me, meaning take every bit of woman out of me. right? Unsex me, ungender me, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. And again, what does it mean to be a man? To be direly cruel? Not necessarily at all, but she wanted any bit of woman left in her to go. But we haven't seen any bit of her as a woman beforehand, except maybe like led her to her heart, but that's it. Why call the spirits if there's nothing to alter? So I would have loved to see more of that womanness that she wanted gone. And again, if you think about it in the idea that she has lost a child or was never able to have children, and was still feeling a little bit controlled by those emotions, she was then asking for those to be taken away. I need to focus on this task at hand, take every woman-y part out of me, and just fill me with ambition. But again, we have to see that little glimmer before. Last thing I'll say about Lady M, which I thought was a missed opportunity, is this two-facedness. I think she has to be a great host, even if it's fake. Because she's instructing Macbeth, who's looking kind of guilty or still processing all of this. And she says, to beguile the time, look like the time. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. So she's telling him, and later even says, like, make sure to be joyful at the feast, remember, which is when he goes a little cray because he sees Banquo's ghost. But she's saying, remember, keep up that nice face, that look of everything's fine. But we never saw that in this Lady Macbeth. She never modeled what she was asking Macbeth to do. And that's the only reason to have that little Duncan welcoming scene, is Duncan comes and says, oh, Lady M, so nice to be at your house. And she has this kind of long, flowy, yes, thank you so much, sir, magnanimous, blah, 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 blah. Thank you for being here. It is a true honor, right? We see her as the perfect politic wife. And in this adaptation, she was kind of like, oh, there's guests? I would never want to come to her house. No way. So I was just kind of, I wanted to see that duplicity. I wanted to see why people followed her. Which brings me to the amazing ensemble casting. Just beautiful. We had an incredible Macduff that we just couldn't wait to root for at the end. And also, like I said, had that moment of showing, I'd say, true masculinity of feeling every emotion and grieving his wife, grieving his kids, and feeling it so deeply. Beautifully done. The doctor who watches Lady Macbeth have her kind of famous out-damn spot scene was Jefferson Mace, who is a Tony Award winner for I Am My Own Wife and Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. Brilliant. He was so good. And those small parts in Shakespeare, especially on film, are vital and need to be that well attended to. Good job casting. Ugh. I love that Malcolm was Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter. It's genius. And Ross. Can we talk about this usually kind of silly character, not silly funny, but one of those kind of people who's always there but is just there to move the plot along or take direction from the like main characters. But in this adaptation, genius, to use Ross as this kind of in-between who understands everything that's going on and has that intellectual distance to make very smart decisions for the betterment of the kingdom. You don't really know whether you should trust him or not. To me, he seemed like somewhere between Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings and Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, with the other kind of, Littlefinger and the other character that was kind of bald monk that is always trying to play both sides. So we trusted Ross, but we also knew that Ross had their own agenda. And so in a way, even though I knew the play, I was surprised pleasantly that he did use his powers for good and was on the side of good by the end. Usually Ross is played very sincerely and hard on the sleeve of, especially with Lady Macduff before she's murdered. Please, I really want to help you, and I'm so sorry that this has happened, and I promise your husband's a good guy, But this Ross was manipulative and considered without being evil. Honestly, I wish Ross had played Lady Macbeth. I think that kind of subtlety, that nuance, that duplicity, and that I don't know whether I trust you or not, but I cannot stop watching you. That's what I want when I see a Lady M. And it's really hard to do. Really hard, especially with that stamp of villain. And so, the pièce de la résistance, The Witches. I had been told by fellow Shakespeare devotees that the witches were the reason to watch the film, and completely agree. If you have not experienced this actress before, I'm so excited that she's getting this big of a platform. Brilliant, brilliant actress named Kathryn Hunter, who's known for her unique physicality and everything you see in that first witches scene. Kind of contortionist, this incredible voice, so powerful in that frail way. She was Puck in Julie Taymor's A Midsummer Night's Dream. And then a lot of people know her as Mrs. Fig in Harry Potter, in Order of the Phoenix. And so I'm, again, glad that she has this larger platform through TV and film, but is a very well-known British actress and physical theater human, which is my big nerd, is physical theater. And I found out that she was the first British woman to play Lear, King Lear, professionally. Oh, I would have loved to see that. So everything with the witches, I think it was perfectly done in the first scene. That is exactly a witch I'd never seen before. It's very Gollum-esque, right, with the physicality and the different voices, which are so subtle but so distinct. And so in a way, it's like, great, that yes, they figured out the witches, correct. And then every time we saw the witches, even within that scene where it morphed into the cloak and the reflection, that was also, oh yeah, that's perfect, that's the witches. And then the birds made total sense, right? Vanished into air, which is what Macbeth describes it as to Lady Macbeth in the letter. So the idea of crows and birds, owls, a lot of aviary imagery happens a lot in production designs. So that wasn't necessarily new, but the way that the witches morphed into and out of the birds, I felt was very new. And that was my other favorite part of the witches, is that every time we saw the witches, it was different. So each time I was like, yep, that's perfect. And each time it was innovative and it was true to the text. Again, I think that's why I was so bugged by Lady M, because it seemed against the text instead of with it. I thought Denzel was gorgeous as Macbeth. I felt for him, but also understood why he fell and thought it was justified. And then the production design gave me a place in which to really think all of this through in time. I wasn't so distracted by all the visuals that I couldn't process it. And so I'm really glad I saw it. I don't think I would watch it again, except for Denzel's speeches and the witches. I mean, I would rewatch, especially that first scene, many, many times, just for inspiration. That sparseness brought me back a little bit to the classic Olivier movies of him living each of those words, but walking around a very stark, kind of large space. But back then, in kind of the mid-Atlantic zone of performance, it would also seem somewhat cold sometimes. So it was a hearkening back to those older films in kind of the best and worst ways. So that's what I thought of the film. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Comment below. I think I'm going to do a round table, meaning like just a group Zoom with some of my Shakespeare nerd friends. I'm excited to geek out with others, but I want to do my initial reflections when they were fresh and when I had a day off, to be honest. Like I said, comment below on what you agreed with, what you didn't, and also if you enjoyed this, what other Shakespeare film you'd like me to review. I've seen many of them, but some I have not yet. So I'd love to hear what you would want to hear more about and give a little context to from a Shakespeare nerd like I. Like me? Moi? The? Me. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Shelby Loves Shakespeare. Liketh, commenteth, and subscribeth, and join us in our Shakespeare nerddom. Thank you so much for being here for all the way to the end, and I will see you very, very soon. Anon!